He swore he wasn't the father and walked away, but 5 years later, at a gala, he saw the boy with his own blue eyes. Emily's hands trembled as she clutched the edge of the marble counter in the spacious apartment she had once believed would be her forever home. The city lights flickered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glittering reminder of the world Alex Blackwell, the man she loved, commanded with cold precision. He stood across from her, his tall frame rigid, his blonde hair perfectly styled, and his piercing blue eyes fixed on her with an expression that made her heart ache. He was not looking at her with love, not even with indifference, but with suspicion sharp enough to cut through her soul. She had expected anger when she told him she was pregnant, maybe even shock, but she had never expected disbelief so profound it would dismantle everything they had built together. "I never cheated on you," she whispered, her voice breaking as the words left her lips for the 100th time that night. She could hardly believe she was saying them at all, because the thought that Alex could imagine her with anyone else felt like a betrayal deeper than anything she had endured. Yet he stood unmoved, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, as though every syllable from her mouth only hardened the wall he was building between them. Alex's tone was colder than the winter wind that seeped through the glass. "You expect me to believe that? That this child is mine? Look at the timing, Emily. It doesn't add up. You've been distracted, secretive. Don't insult me with lies." The words sliced through her, because they came not from a stranger, but from the man who once whispered promises of forever into her hair while holding her close at night. She remembered those moments, those declarations, and wondered how they could vanish so easily, replaced by this cruel distance. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she refused to collapse before him. "Alex, everything I've done, every moment I've given, has been for you, for us. I've never looked at anyone else. This baby is yours. How can you not see that?" Her voice rose, trembling with both desperation and defiance, but he only turned away, his expression unreadable. She saw his shoulders stiffen, his back like a wall she could not break through, and in that silence she realized the man she thought she knew was already gone. He reached for his coat, his movements sharp and final. "I won't be manipulated into this," he said, his voice like steel. "If you think you can trap me with a child, you're mistaken. I don't believe you, Emily, and I won't be a part of this." Her knees weakened, and she gripped the counter tighter, as if holding on to it could keep her from falling apart. She wanted to scream, to remind him of the nights they spent dreaming of the future, of the way his hands used to linger on her stomach as though he imagined life they might one day create. But all of that had crumbled in the face of his pride and his inability to trust her. The door slammed behind him, the sound reverberating through the emptiness of the apartment like a death knell. Emily sank to the floor, her sobs racking her body as the truth settled over her. She was alone. Alone with the child growing inside her, alone with the weight of betrayal from the man she had loved more than life itself. The city lights still shone outside, mocking her with their brilliance, and for the first time, Emily felt the cold reality of a world without him. Yet even as despair consumed her, a spark of determination flickered beneath the grief. She pressed her hand against her stomach, whispering through her tears, "I'll protect you. No matter what, I'll give you everything." In that moment, she knew that Alex's rejection would not define her or the child she carried. He had chosen his pride, but she would choose love. And though the road ahead promised to be brutal, she swore silently that she would survive it, not only for herself but for the life within her. That night marked the end of one life and the beginning of another. Emily lost the man she thought was her future, but in his place she found a reason to fight harder than she ever had before. She did not yet know what the years ahead would hold, but as she cried into the silence, she felt a strange clarity through the pain. Alex had closed the door, but she would not let it close her spirit. She would rise from the ashes he left behind, even if she had to build everything with her bare hands. The months that followed Alex's departure were the hardest Emily had ever known. She carried her child through loneliness that seemed to press against her chest at every hour of the day, and though her body weakened with the weight of pregnancy, her will hardened. She rented a small apartment far from the luxury she had once known, a place with peeling paint on the walls and pipes that rattled through the night, but it was hers and it was safe. There was no longer the comfort of expensive sheets or elegant dinners, only the reality of long nights spent staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the city, and wondering how she would provide for the life that grew inside her. Yet even in those moments of fear, when doubt tried to consume her, she would rest her hand on her stomach and remind herself that she was no longer fighting for just herself. When Noah was born, the hospital room was filled not with flowers and visitors but with silence and exhaustion. Emily held him in her arms, his small body wrapped in a thin blanket, his blonde hair already visible beneath the harsh hospital lights, and his blue eyes blinking up at her with an innocence that shattered her completely. For the first time since Alex had left, she felt both broken and whole. She whispered his name, Noah, as if by naming him she was promising to guard him against the cruelty of the world. There was no father at her side, no proud hand resting on her shoulder, but she told herself she would be enough, even if it meant sacrificing every part of herself. Those early months blurred into a haze of sleepless nights and endless days. Emily worked whatever job she could find, taking shifts at a cafe in the morning, cleaning offices in the evenings, and later working on small projects late at night while Noah slept in a crib beside her bed. Sometimes she felt her body collapsing under the exhaustion, but each time she looked at her son's face, she found the strength to continue. He grew quickly, his laughter echoing through the tiny apartment like sunlight piercing through storm clouds. His eyes, so unmistakably Alex's, cut her with every glance, reminding her of what she had lost, but they also gave her a reason to keep fighting. She told herself those eyes no longer belonged to the man who had abandoned them, they belonged to Noah, and through him they carried a new meaning. The world outside was harsh. Bills piled up, and there were days when Emily had to choose between paying rent and buying fresh food. She cut corners, skipped meals, and learned to sew Noah's clothes when they grew too small. Her friends drifted away, unable to understand her sacrifices, and the glamorous world she once touched felt like a distant dream. But in the solitude, she discovered a resilience she never knew she had. She learned to make toys from scraps, to turn simple dinners into small celebrations, and to find joy in the little things, a smile, a giggle, the way Noah's hand curled tightly around her finger as though he knew she was his entire universe. There were moments when the pain of abandonment resurfaced with unbearable force. She would remember the way Alex had looked at her, his disbelief, his rejection, and wonder how he could deny a child that was so clearly his. On those nights, she cried silently into her pillow, not wanting her son to feel her despair. But even in her tears, she promised herself that Noah would never feel unwanted, never feel unloved. He would grow up knowing that he was her miracle, her strength, and the very reason she had not given up. As the years passed, Emily slowly began to carve a path forward. The cafe job turned into a management position when her dedication caught the owner's attention. The jewelry she crafted late at night to quiet her mind began to draw interest online, small sales at first, then larger orders. Each step was painfully slow, built on exhaustion and determination, but she could feel something shifting. She was no longer simply surviving, she was building. Noah grew alongside her, his laughter louder, his questions endless, his presence a reminder that her sacrifices were not in vain. By the time he was 3, their small apartment was filled not with wealth but with warmth. The walls bore the marks of his drawings, the shelves held the little trinkets she had made, and the air carried the scent of a home forged in love and struggle. Emily had not forgotten Alex, nor the pain he had caused, but she no longer let his absence define her. She had learned to stand without him, to thrive despite him, and most of all, to love her son enough for both parents. She did not yet know that the empire she was quietly building through her late-night work would one day rival Alex's own. She only knew that for Noah, she would keep moving forward, one step at a time, until the world had no choice but to see her worth. Emily never planned to become an entrepreneur. Her jewelry designs had started as a way to calm her restless mind during Noah's earliest months, something to keep her hands occupied when the silence of the apartment threatened to swallow her. She worked with scraps of wire and beads she could afford, bending and twisting them into shapes that reminded her of resilience, circles that symbolized wholeness, tiny stars that spoke of hope, and intricate knots that reflected the tangles of her own journey. At first, she kept them tucked away in a box, unsure if anyone would ever find value in the fragile things she created. But necessity has a way of forcing courage, and one night, with Noah asleep beside her, she took shaky photographs of her pieces and uploaded them to an online marketplace. She told herself it was a gamble, but one worth taking, because she could no longer live on wages that barely stretched from week to week. The first order arrived after 3 days, a small silver pendant she had shaped into the form of a crescent moon. Emily packaged it carefully in tissue paper she bought from the discount store, tied it with a string, and slipped a handwritten note inside thanking the stranger who believed in her work. The sale itself barely covered the cost of groceries, but the feeling it gave her, the sense that her art could matter to someone else, was priceless. Slowly, more orders trickled in, at first from people she didn't know, then from repeat customers who praised the detail in her work. Each piece carried a part of her story, though the buyers could never have guessed the depth of what those delicate creations meant. As her reputation grew, she devoted every spare moment to her craft. She woke before dawn to work while Noah still slept, her fingers raw from bending wires but her heart steadier with every piece she completed. During the day, she juggled her job at the cafe, rushing between tables with a smile plastered across her face even as her legs ached. In the evenings, she hurried home to feed and bathe Noah, to read him bedtime stories until his breathing deepened, and then returned to her small desk where half-finished designs awaited her. Nights stretched into early mornings, her body fueled by coffee and determination. There were times when exhaustion threatened to defeat her, when she thought she might collapse under the weight of it all, but each time she looked at Noah's face, she was reminded of why she endured. Months turned into years, and the little box of trinkets became a small business. Orders multiplied faster than she could keep up with, and soon she was forced to make difficult choices. The cafe offered stability, but her jewelry offered possibility. After weeks of torment, she resigned from her job and threw herself fully into the business, terrified that failure would mean taking food from her son's mouth. The risk kept her awake at night, but it also ignited a fire in her she had not felt in years. She began collaborating with suppliers, learning about gemstones, metals, and designs that could elevate her work. Each step was a new world to her, a crash course in ambition, but she absorbed every lesson with the hunger of someone who had no other option. Her breakthrough came unexpectedly when a fashion blogger discovered her online shop and featured one of Emily's necklaces in a post. Within hours, her inbox flooded with orders, far more than she could fill alone. She spent the following weeks working until her fingers blistered, pushing herself to the limit, but the flood of attention did more than overwhelm her, it transformed her trajectory. Suddenly, boutiques began reaching out, asking if she could supply them with collections. Influencers contacted her to collaborate. What had once been a desperate side project was now a name whispered in the corners of the fashion industry, and Emily realized she was standing at the edge of something much larger than herself. Through it all, Noah grew into a boy filled with curiosity and laughter, his blue eyes a constant reminder of the man who had denied him. There were moments when Emily caught herself staring at him, her breath catching at the uncanny resemblance, and the wound of Alex's rejection reopened. She wondered if one day Noah would ask about his father, if he would blame her for the emptiness she tried so hard to fill. But then Noah would run into her arms, his small voice declaring his love, and Emily knew she was enough. She had to be. As her business expanded, so did her confidence. She attended trade shows where her designs were praised and envied, standing tall in rooms filled with people who once would have looked right past her. She hired a small team of women, many of them single mothers like herself, who worked beside her in a rented studio space that smelled of metal and possibility. Together they built not only jewelry but hope, each piece carrying the strength of women who refused to be broken by abandonment or circumstance. By the time Noah was 5, Emily's company had grown into a brand recognized for its elegance and meaning. Her pieces appeared in magazines, her name spoken in circles she had once only glimpsed from afar. She was no longer the girl left behind in an empty apartment, sobbing over betrayal. She had transformed into a woman who had carved her own path, built her own fortune, and stood unshaken by the man who had doubted her. But success brought with it something she had not anticipated: visibility. With every interview, every article, every photo spread, she risked crossing paths with the very world Alex Blackwell still ruled. Though she told herself she no longer cared, there was a fear that lingered in the back of her mind, a question she could not silence. What would happen when their worlds collided again, when he finally saw the son who bore his face and the woman who no longer needed him? That day was coming faster than she realized, and though Emily believed she had buried her past, the truth was waiting for its moment to rise. The night of the gala arrived with an energy that seemed to buzz through the city itself, the kind of evening where chandeliers would glitter over glasses of champagne, where fortunes were measured not only in numbers but in the shimmer of diamonds and the weight of whispers. Emily stood in front of the mirror of her modest but elegant apartment, adjusting the neckline of her gown, one she had designed herself from remnants of silk she had bartered for years ago. It was sleek, dark, and understated, yet it carried the quiet confidence of a woman who had clawed her way out of obscurity and had no intention of returning. Her jewelry, the very pieces that had given her a second chance at life, adorned her neck and wrists. Each one carried a story, a battle fought, and a victory won. She breathed deeply as she studied her reflection, her dark hair falling gracefully around her face, her blue eyes steady even as nerves knotted in her stomach. Tonight was not about Alex, not about the past, but about showing the world what she had become. Noah, now 5 years old, sat on the edge of the bed swinging his small legs, his blonde hair catching the light and his blue eyes wide with admiration. He clapped his hands together and told her she looked like a queen. Emily knelt to hug him, pressing her face into his soft hair as she whispered her love. She had debated whether to bring him to such an event, knowing it was a world filled with judgment and sharp eyes, but in the end she chose to. He was not her secret, not her shame, but her pride. If people whispered, let them whisper. She wanted him to see her not only as his mother but as the woman who had fought to give him everything. The venue was breathtaking, a hall gilded in gold and shimmering with crystal chandeliers that hung like frozen waterfalls above the sea of wealth. The air carried the scent of roses and expensive perfume, the murmur of polite conversation punctuated by bursts of laughter from those who thrived on power. Emily entered with her head held high, Noah's small hand firmly in hers. A few people turned to glance at her, some with curiosity, others with recognition, for her jewelry had begun to make waves in these very circles. She ignored the stares and moved gracefully, acknowledging those who greeted her, while inside her heart beat with the intensity of someone walking across a precipice. It happened sooner than she expected. Across the room, she saw him. Alex Blackwell, as impossibly commanding as ever, stood surrounded by businessmen and women who clung to his every word. His blonde hair gleamed under the chandelier's light, his tailored suit cut to perfection, his blue eyes sharp and calculating as he gestured with the kind of authority that had always come so easily to him. For a moment, Emily froze, her breath catching in her throat as old memories surged, the sound of the door slamming, the echo of his words, the pain of disbelief. She thought she had prepared for this, had armored herself against the possibility of seeing him again, but no amount of preparation could soften the impact of that reality. Noah tugged on her hand, asking for a drink of juice, and the simple sound of his voice grounded her. Emily bent down, nodded, and smiled at him, grateful for the anchor he provided. As they moved toward the refreshments table, she felt Alex's gaze fall on her. She tried to ignore it, to focus on her son, but the intensity of his stare burned into her skin until she finally looked up. His eyes widened, just slightly, but she caught it, the flicker of shock, the instant recognition. He had seen Noah. He had seen the mirror of himself standing beside her, and in that moment Emily knew there was no denying what his heart must already understand. Alex excused himself from the crowd, his movement steady though his face betrayed a storm raging beneath the surface. He approached them slowly, as if each step carried the weight of 5 years lost. Emily braced herself, her spine straightening, her expression hardening into one of calm strength. Noah, oblivious to the tension, sipped his juice and looked around at the grand decorations with the awe of a child. When Alex finally stood before them, his blue eyes darted between Emily and the boy, the color draining slightly from his face. "Emily," he said, his voice lower than she remembered, rougher, almost uncertain. His eyes fell again on Noah, and he swallowed hard before speaking again. This is your son?" Emily's lips curved into a small, restrained smile, though her heart was pounding. "Our son," she corrected softly, her words deliberate. For years she had carried the burden of proving herself, of being disbelieved and abandoned, but tonight she would not shy away from the truth. Alex's breath caught, his gaze locking on Noah's face. The boy's blonde hair, the blue eyes identical to his own, left no room for doubt. Emily saw the realization dawn on him, the walls he had built around his denial beginning to crumble. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came. For once, Alex Blackwell, the man who always had an answer, always had control, stood speechless. The silence stretched, heavy and sharp, until Emily finally broke it. "You didn't believe me," she said quietly, her voice steady but filled with the weight of years of pain. "And because of that, you missed everything. His first steps, his first words, his laughter. You missed the chance to be the father he needed." Her words did not tremble, because she had rehearsed them in her heart 1,000 times, though she never imagined she would say them here, in a room full of wealth and power, with strangers just feet away. Alex's jaw tightened, his hands flexing at his sides. He looked as though he wanted to reach out, to touch Noah, but his body betrayed hesitation, as if he knew he had no right. Emily turned slightly, placing a protective hand on her son's shoulder, her body language clear. She would not let him rewrite history with a single look. Noah gazed up at Alex curiously, sensing something unusual but not understanding it. Emily's heart broke for the innocence of that gaze, for the years of connection stolen from them both. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and prepared herself for whatever storm would follow, but deep inside she knew the balance of power had shifted. She was no longer the girl who had begged him to believe her. She was a woman who had built a life without him, and now it was Alex who had to reckon with the truth he had once denied. The gala continued around them, laughter and music echoing through the hall, but for Emily and Alex, time had frozen. Everything they had been, everything they had lost, and everything that could still come hung between them like a fragile thread waiting to snap, or to hold. Alex spent the rest of the evening in a haze that no amount of champagne or polite conversation could pierce. The moment he saw Noah's face, the world around him tilted, and all the walls he had built so carefully to justify his decision 5 years earlier collapsed with a violence that left him shaken. He had told himself for years that he was right, that Emily had lied, that walking away had been the only option to preserve his dignity. Yet now, staring into the reflection of his own eyes on the face of a little boy, he felt as though the ground beneath him had given way. He watched from across the room as Emily moved gracefully through the crowd, shaking hands with potential clients, speaking confidently about her work, her presence radiating the kind of power he once believed she would never have without him. Noah clung to her side at times, his small hand gripping hers, and the sight of it twisted something deep inside Alex, something that was equal parts regret, awe, and fear. When the gala ended, he lingered outside, waiting. Emily emerged into the cool night air, her dark hair gleaming under the streetlights, her son yawning sleepily at her side. She looked at Alex as though expecting him to say something, her gaze steady but guarded, as if she had already prepared for whatever excuses he might offer. He opened his mouth, desperate to speak, to explain, to apologize, but the words caught in his throat. What apology could undo 5 years of absence? What explanation could erase the nights she had spent alone, the sacrifices she had made to give their child a life he had been too proud to provide? Emily did not wait for him to find the words. She lifted Noah into her arms, balanced him against her hip, and simply said, "Good night, Alex." Her voice was calm, neither bitter nor warm, but it carried finality. Then she turned and walked away, her silhouette growing smaller with each step until she disappeared into the waiting car that drove her away. He stood there on the curb, his fists clenched at his sides, consumed by the unbearable truth that he had not only lost her but had missed the very essence of what mattered most. In the days that followed, Alex found himself restless and distracted. His empire, which had once demanded every ounce of his attention, suddenly felt hollow. Meetings blurred into background noise, contracts sat unread on his desk, and even the glow of success could not quiet the storm in his chest. He saw Noah's face everywhere, in the reflections of glass towers, in the photographs on his employees' desks, in the rare quiet moments when he was alone in his penthouse and the silence screamed at him. He could not escape the realization that he had a son who did not know him, who had been raised to believe his father did not exist. For Emily, the encounter reopened wounds she had thought she had sealed. She told herself she had faced Alex and survived, that nothing more could hurt her now. Yet at night, after Noah had drifted off to sleep, she found herself staring at the ceiling, replaying the way Alex's eyes had softened when he looked at their child. There had been shock, yes, but also something else, something raw and broken. Against her will, her heart remembered the man she had once loved, the man who had whispered promises before everything fell apart. She reminded herself of the betrayal, of the nights she cried alone, of the strength it had taken to rebuild her life. Still, she could not entirely erase the image of Alex standing in silence, speechless for once in his life, undone by the truth he could no longer deny. A week later, Alex appeared at the studio where Emily and her small team worked. He stood at the doorway, his tall frame filling the space, his tailored suit a sharp contrast to the clutter of tools and the hum of creativity around them. Emily froze when she saw him, her heart tightening with equal parts anger and dread. Her employees glanced between them, sensing tension but saying nothing as she stepped outside to meet him. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice quiet but firm. Emily crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. "There's nothing left to say, Alex. You made your choice years ago." His jaw tightened, his eyes burning with something she couldn't quite read. "I was wrong," he admitted, the words sounding foreign on his tongue. "I see that now. I can't undo what I did, but I can't walk away again, not after seeing him." Emily's chest ached at his words, but she did not let it show. "You don't get to decide that now. You don't get to appear after 5 years and claim what you abandoned. Noah doesn't know you, and he doesn't need you to disrupt his life." Alex flinched at the sharpness of her tone, but he did not back down. "He's my son, Emily. I didn't believe you, and that was the greatest mistake of my life, but I won't repeat it. I want to know him. I want to be part of his life, whatever it takes." Her eyes glistened, though she willed the tears not to fall. She had dreamed of hearing those words years ago, when she had begged him to believe her, but now they only brought pain. She shook her head. "You can't just walk in and rewrite history. He doesn't even know who you are. And I won't let you hurt him the way you hurt me." Alex's voice broke, his pride finally stripped away. "Please, Emily. Give me a chance to prove that I can be better, not for you, but for him." The plea lingered in the air, heavy with the weight of all that had been lost. Emily turned away, her shoulders trembling as she fought to steady herself. She knew that letting Alex in would risk reopening wounds that had barely healed, but she also knew that denying Noah the chance to know his father could one day cost her as well. For now, she said nothing, leaving Alex standing there, waiting for an answer she was not yet ready to give. That night, as she tucked Noah into bed, he looked up at her with his wide blue eyes and asked a question that made her heart stop. "Mommy, who was that man?" She kissed his forehead, her voice catching as she whispered, "Someone from a long time ago." But she knew it was only a matter of time before the truth came crashing into their lives, and she would be forced to decide whether the man who had once shattered her could ever be allowed back into the world she had built. Emily tried to throw herself into her work, convincing herself that if she kept busy enough she could drown out the echoes of Alex's voice, but no amount of sketches or new designs could silence the turmoil inside her. Every time she looked at Noah, she was confronted with the impossible truth that he deserved answers she was not ready to give. Noah's eyes, so bright and so undeniably Alex's, seemed to stare right through her whenever he asked the kinds of innocent questions only children could ask, questions that twisted her heart because she had no simple way to answer them. He had noticed the man at the studio, had noticed her tension, and though he did not yet understand, Emily knew it was only a matter of time before curiosity blossomed into confusion and confusion into resentment. She had sworn to protect him from pain, but now she realized she could not protect him from his own identity. Meanwhile, Alex refused to disappear. He did not storm back into her life as she had feared, nor did he attempt to wield his wealth or power as weapons against her. Instead, he showed up quietly, persistently, always careful to give her space but never letting her forget he was there. He sent letters, not typed or delivered by assistants, but handwritten, pages filled with words that surprised her with their humility. He admitted his failures without excuse, wrote about nights when he sat awake haunted by the memory of her tears, confessed to moments when he wished he had fought his pride and chosen her instead of his suspicion. Emily read the letters alone, her hands trembling as she turned the pages, torn between the part of her that wanted to burn them and the part of her that recognized the sincerity in every line. She did not respond, not yet, but she did not throw them away either. Then there were the gestures. Alex had once been a man who believed money solved every problem, but now he seemed determined to prove otherwise. When Noah fell ill with a stubborn fever, Emily found Alex waiting at the hospital, his expression pale with worry, insisting he only wanted to know that the boy was all right. He stayed in the waiting room all night, refusing to leave even when Emily told him she had everything under control. She watched him from a distance, saw the way he paced, the way he rubbed his hands over his face, and for the first time she glimpsed a man stripped of his armor, terrified not of losing money or power but of losing something real. Noah, of course, noticed. The next time Alex appeared, lingering awkwardly at the park while Emily played with her son, Noah tugged at her sleeve and asked if the man wanted to join them. Emily hesitated, her heart thundering, but Alex crouched down at a respectful distance and introduced himself gently. Noah studied him with curiosity, his small brow furrowed as if trying to decide whether this stranger could be trusted. The moment was fragile, a breath held between the past and the future, but when Noah offered Alex a toy car from his collection, something in Emily cracked. It was such a simple gesture, innocent and unassuming, yet it carried the weight of forgiveness she had not yet found in herself. Days turned into weeks, and Alex's presence grew harder to ignore. He never forced himself into Noah's life but waited patiently for invitations, small opportunities where he could prove himself without words. He taught Noah how to throw a baseball in the park, his large hands guiding the boy's smaller ones, his voice gentle and encouraging. He fixed a broken toy truck that Emily had set aside to repair, earning a grin from Noah that lit up the afternoon. Each interaction carved deeper into Emily's heart, reminding her of the man she had once loved, the man she believed had been lost forever. But she was not naive. She reminded herself daily of the pain he had caused, of the years she had endured without him, and of the fear that letting him close again could mean repeating that devastation. Still, late at night, when Noah slept and the apartment was quiet, Emily caught herself wondering what it would mean to forgive. Forgiveness, she realized, was not about erasing the past but about accepting that the past no longer had power over the future. Could she allow Alex into Noah's life without opening her heart to him again? Was it possible to draw such a line, to separate the father he wanted to be from the man who had once broken her? The questions kept her awake, circling endlessly, as she traced the outlines of her sketches and tried to imagine a future where anger no longer dictated her choices. One evening, she received another letter from Alex, longer than the rest. In it, he wrote not about himself but about Noah, about the boys' laughter in the park, the way his face lit up when he discovered something new. He admitted that every moment he spent with Noah reminded him of what he had lost, not in money or status but in love, in family, in the simple beauty of being present. At the end of the letter, he wrote, "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking you to let me earn our son's trust, even if it takes the rest of my life." Emily pressed the paper to her chest, her eyes wet with tears she had sworn she would never shed for him again. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, Alex's words were not empty, that the man she once loved was trying to rise from the ashes of his mistakes. She did not yet know if she could forgive him, but she realized she owed it to Noah to at least give him the chance to know the truth. The decision was terrifying, but as she looked at her son sleeping peacefully, she knew the next chapter of their lives would not be written by fear. It would be written by courage, the courage to confront the past, to protect the present, and perhaps, against all odds, to rebuild a future she had long ago stopped believing was possible. Emily's decision to allow Alex a place in Noah's life did not happen with a dramatic declaration or a sudden change of heart but in the quiet, complicated rhythm of days that followed. She invited him, cautiously at first, to join them at the park on Saturdays, making it clear that her presence would always be near. Alex accepted the boundaries without argument, showing up each time dressed not in the polished armor of a CEO but in simple shirts and jeans, as though he wanted to shed the weight of his empire to be just a man in his son's eyes. He was careful, never pushing too hard, never speaking out of turn, and Emily observed him with a mix of suspicion and reluctant admiration as he laughed with Noah, chasing him through fields, teaching him to ride his small bike, listening intently to his endless stories about school and cartoons. The transformation startled her. She had known Alex as a man who commanded boardrooms, who cut deals with ruthless efficiency, who measured worth in numbers and victories. But with Noah, he became someone softer, someone she had never thought existed beneath the layers of arrogance and ambition. He let Noah climb onto his shoulders, let him smear ice cream across his suit jacket without flinching, let himself be pulled into games where the stakes were nothing more than laughter. For Noah, this was simply joy. For Emily, it was disarming. She could not ignore the tenderness in Alex's gestures, the way he studied Noah's face with a reverence that betrayed years of absence, or the quiet sorrow that sometimes clouded his eyes when he thought no one was watching. Yet trust was not built overnight. Emily remained guarded, reminding herself of the pain that had shaped her into who she was. She questioned his motives, wondered if guilt alone drove him, and feared what would happen if his resolve faltered again. She tested him in small ways, asking him to keep promises, to show up for school events, to step into the unglamorous parts of parenthood like helping with homework or sitting through pediatric appointments. Each time, to her surprise, he delivered. He arrived on time, he listened patiently, he asked questions as though trying to learn what fatherhood meant after so many lost years. One evening, after a long day, Emily watched from the doorway as Alex sat cross-legged on the living room floor with Noah, carefully building a tower of blocks. Noah laughed each time it toppled over, and Alex would rebuild it with exaggerated concentration until the boy squealed with delight. The scene was simple, almost ordinary, but Emily's throat tightened as she realized how extraordinary it was for them. 5 years ago, she had begged Alex to imagine such moments, and he had turned away. Now, without words, he was living them. Still, there were confrontations they could not avoid. One night, after Noah had fallen asleep, Emily confronted Alex with the raw truth she had carried for years. She told him about the nights she had gone hungry to feed their son, the jobs she had taken, the humiliation she had endured when people looked at her with pity. She told him about the fear of medical bills, the tears she had hidden from Noah, and the loneliness that had nearly broken her. Her voice trembled with anger as she accused him of abandoning not only her but the life they had created. Alex listened without interruption, his face pale, his hands clenched, and when she finished, he whispered that nothing she could say would ever condemn him more than his own regret already had. He admitted that his pride had blinded him, that his fear of betrayal had cost him everything that truly mattered, and that he would never forgive himself for missing Noah's first word or first step. For once, Emily believed he meant every word. In the weeks that followed, whispers began to swirl in their social circles. People noticed Alex's presence around Emily and Noah, noticed that the woman he had once cast aside was no longer a footnote but a force in her own right. Some called it scandal, others speculation, but Emily ignored the noise. She had lived too long under the weight of judgment to care about gossip now. What mattered was Noah's smile when he saw Alex at the door, the way he introduced him shyly as "my dad" at school, the way his world seemed to expand with each moment of belonging. For Emily, the journey was more complicated. She did not simply fall back into love, nor did she trust easily. But she began to see glimpses of the man she had once adored, not in grand gestures but in quiet consistencies. She saw it in the way he carried Noah to bed when he fell asleep on the couch, in the way he praised her work publicly without trying to overshadow her, in the way he looked at her sometimes with an expression that was not demanding or entitled but filled with regret and hope. It was not enough to erase the past, but it was enough to make her wonder if forgiveness could one day lead to something more. The most shocking moment came when Alex asked to attend one of her business events, not as a guest of honor but simply to support her. She had built her company from nothing, and now her designs were being showcased in front of industry leaders. He stood at the back of the room, watching her command the stage, and afterward he told her he had never been more proud. The sincerity in his eyes unsettled her, because it reminded her of a time long ago when he had been the man who promised her the world. She had long since stopped believing in those promises, but standing there with Noah tugging at her hand and Alex watching her with quiet admiration, she felt a flicker of something dangerous and fragile, a possibility she had sworn she would never consider again. Emily knew they were far from resolution. The scars of abandonment ran deep, and love could not be resurrected by simple apologies or fleeting moments of tenderness. But she also knew that something had shifted irreversibly. Alex was no longer the man who had left her crying in the shadows of his doubt. He was becoming a father, perhaps even becoming the man he had always been capable of being, and that realization terrified her as much as it gave her hope. The past still loomed between them, heavy and unforgiving, but for the first time in years, Emily found herself wondering if the future could be rewritten. Not just for Noah, but for all of them. The day that everything changed came not with a grand gesture or a carefully orchestrated plan but in the most unexpected of ways. Emily had been preparing for an important showcase, a night that marked the culmination of years of work. Her jewelry line, once born out of desperation at a tiny kitchen table, was now commanding the attention of high-end buyers and critics alike. The event was set in a glittering ballroom, its walls lined with photographs of her designs, and as she walked through the space making final checks, she felt a deep swell of pride. This was not just her success, it was Noah's too, and she thought of all the nights she had worked by candlelight while he slept, all the tears she had swallowed down just to keep moving forward. Tonight, the world would see what resilience looked like, and for once, she would allow herself to feel the weight of victory. Alex arrived later, unannounced but not unwelcome. He moved through the crowd with less arrogance than Emily remembered from years ago, his presence less like a storm demanding attention and more like a steady shadow offering support. She caught his gaze across the room, and though her first instinct was still to steel herself, something softer followed. He no longer looked at her as a possession or a conquest but as someone he was learning to admire all over again. For a fleeting second, she allowed herself to feel what it was like to be seen not for her mistakes or her pain but for the woman she had become. Noah was with her too, his small hand clinging to hers as he marveled at the sparkling lights and elegant gowns. He asked endless questions, tugging at her dress to point at displays and whispering his excitement into her ear. Emily smiled down at him, her heart swelling with the knowledge that he was old enough now to remember this moment, old enough to see his mother as more than just the person who tucked him in at night. He would know her as a fighter, as someone who had turned heartbreak into triumph. But the night was not only about celebration. At one point, as Emily was addressing the crowd, speaking about her journey and the meaning behind her designs, Noah slipped his hand into Alex's. It was a simple action, unconscious and natural, but it hit Emily like a wave. She looked down from the stage and saw them together, the boy who had once been denied and the man who had once denied him, now standing side by side, connected by something that could not be undone. Her voice caught for a moment, but she steadied herself, finishing her speech with more emotion than she had intended. The applause that followed was loud and sincere, but what echoed in her chest was not the praise of strangers, it was the undeniable truth that she could not erase Alex from their story, no matter how hard she tried. Later, when the event quieted and the last guests drifted away, Alex approached her. His expression was serious, his usual confidence tempered by humility. "Emily," he began, his voice low, "I've watched you these past months. I've seen the life you built, the strength you carry, and the way you've raised Noah into someone extraordinary. I don't deserve to ask for anything, but I need you to know that I'm not leaving again. Whatever role you allow me, whatever boundaries you set, I'll accept them. But I want to be here. I want to be his father. And, if you can ever find it in your heart, I want the chance to be more than just a ghost from your past." Emily's heart pounded as his words sank in. She wanted to dismiss them, to remind him of the pain, the nights of hunger, the loneliness that had nearly broken her. But she also saw the sincerity in his eyes, the way he looked at Noah as if the boy were the center of his universe, the way he looked at her with a reverence that went beyond regret. She stood there in silence for a long time, the memories of betrayal clashing with the possibility of redemption. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but soft. "You can't erase what happened, Alex. And I can't promise that I'll ever forget it. But Noah deserves the chance to know you, and maybe I deserve the chance to see if you can be the man I once believed you could be. I won't rush into forgiveness, and I won't pretend it's simple. But I'm willing to see where this goes, for his sake and for mine." Alex's shoulders sagged with relief, and though he did not smile, there was a light in his eyes that spoke of hope. He nodded, accepting her words not as a victory but as a fragile beginning. They stood together in the quiet of the ballroom, watching Noah run across the floor with a toy car clutched in his hand, his laughter echoing through the empty space. It was a sound that reminded them both of what truly mattered, a sound that healed wounds in ways words never could. As Emily watched her son, she realized that the story she had once thought ended in betrayal was still being written. It was not the story she had imagined years ago, not the life she had once begged for, but perhaps it was something stronger. It was a story forged in pain, tempered by resilience, and now, just maybe, on the cusp of forgiveness. She slipped her hand into Alex's, tentative but deliberate, and though the road ahead was uncertain, she knew one truth with absolute clarity. The past would always haunt them, but the future was theirs to build, and this time she would not face it alone.